Thank you for joining me for this important conversation about the mission of God in intercultural settings. Now, it's important for us to understand that it's one thing for a church to have a number of ethnicities represented in attendance on a Sunday morning. I mean, if you were to visit our church in Cedar Park, Texas, my goodness, it is just a wealth of diversity. So many folks from so many settings. But can I tell us all today that it is another thing for a church to include people of these ethnic backgrounds in leadership and certainly in decision making processes. As a church desires to transition toward being an intercultural church, it uses both biblical principles and pragmatic realities in this endeavor. Now, I will share that it's important to understand that there will be some issues that cloud intercultural sessions and transitions and leadership in a local context, in a church setting. So, a couple of things that might cloud the issue, so to speak, would be cultural ignorance. For instance, multiple cultural backgrounds, when they're all thrust together, often result in a vast difference of preferences and certainly expectations. Sometimes language barriers can be the issue. With one language, often English, serving as a primary means of communication, people who are less fluent with a language can often struggle to be understood and sometimes understand the realities of the moment. Ethnically based stereotypes. The host culture may have a tendency to regulate other cultures to their appropriate roles based on some preconception of that culture. Passive racism, judgments that have been formed about another culture. Now, these individuals are tested, these issues are tested in the context of one's local faith community, in the context of a Christian community. Economic separation. Many newcomers from other nations, they often find themselves underemployed, right? They find themselves seeking job or seeking employment and not really have the funding that someone may have if they were, say, growing up in North America. And therefore, for some, they're not even as viewed as holding the same status as those who are economically well established. So these can be some of the barriers when it comes to having an intercultural church. Exclusions from minorities from leadership groups due to long established relationship with the host culture or respective appointment processes. Sizable visible minorities may find themselves underrepresented or not represented at all in the leadership circles of a church, even though they may be actively engaged in church programming. Distinct differences in worldview and spiritual expectations. You know, the thing about expectations, we all have them, right? But when it comes to a church setting, expectations of what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate, what is spiritual, what is not quite spiritual, can sometimes vary between the host culture and other cultures. Often, this can lead to judgment. This can also lead to disillusionment. Social partitions that occur either naturally or may occur for whatever reason. In other words, niceties, can be sometimes expected, but sometimes might not be well received. And sometimes they might not even be able to communicate or translate well outside of the church building. And so I would pose that there are some ideals that we can hang on to. If we're really going to be an intercultural church, if we're going to be a church for our local context, we've got to look beyond the borders of our own lens, right? What we only see with the natural eye, we've got to be willing to see beyond that. And so being interculture intercultural, it coincides with the mission of the church to reach every ethnic group with the gospel message of Jesus Christ, knowing that the Lord has placed people from nations worldwide within proximity to a local church. And so this begs the question, this calls us then to have this missionary response from the church. When we begin to read Acts chapter 16 and verse 26, from one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth. He determined the times set for them and the exact places in which they should live. God did this so that individuals would seek him and perhaps reach for him, find him, because we must know that God is not far from us. Being intercultural, it really corresponds to the nature of the gospel to reconcile the world into Christ Jesus. Without partiality, then, the local church, it reaches those around them as ministers of reconciliation. And so being intercultural, it concurs really with the nature of the church. Being intercultural, it concurs with the nature of the church. To be a redemptive community reflecting then this new place of peace and this place of love, and where the Spirit of God is dwelling, and where God's presence is made real to every person who walks into the doors of the church. And so the local church, with persons from various ethnicities and backgrounds, really has the distinct privilege of demonstrating God in action, God's love in action. And it really removes barriers. It removes walls of animosity. It removes barriers of hatred. So being intercultural, it conveys a picture of multicultural worship where every tribe, every nation, every people, every language will worship together before the throne of God. Revelation chapter 7, 9 through 12. And so the local church has an opportunity to demonstrate aspects of unified worship and really this future heavenly community that we're all seeking to obtain and one day worship together in heaven with the Lord. Each leadership team sincerely must desire to engage diverse cultures in their own community, and we must engage to understand scriptures that portray that God is the people of all nations. The God is the people, he is the God of all nations and all tribes and every kindred. And so an intercultural church is one fosters diversity, integrates different cultural articulations of faith and worship. Really, a church for all people. It embodies this process of shying away from segregation and running into humility and running into and becoming a close-knit family. You know, the thing about the North American church is we have such an amazing opportunity to serve God and serve others, and we do so with having arms wide open and being hospitable to folks of different nations, different people groups, languages. There are so many individuals who migrate to North America on a daily basis. And so it really provides us a great opportunity to renew this process of discovery. What does biblical vision look like in a church for our world today? How can we be that diverse community that God really is asking us to become? And this biblical vision of culture, linguistic, this radical deal, it really provides us this vehicle that we can enrich the church's worship. It can enlarge the boundaries of the local church. It provides a sense of fellowship and unity and camaraderie, and it allows us to see ourselves from a different vantage point. In fact, it broadens the church's witness to God's reconciling the world and allowing the mission of God to manifest in our local context. And so today's church faces the challenge of what it means to be a church in light of an ever-growing diverse population. This may entail that we're becoming advocates on behalf of those who are hurting or those that are seeking asylum, refugees. I don't know someone, but they're people. Everybody has a soul, and everybody will spend eternity somewhere, and therefore we're called to be God's grace and God's hands and feet in our world today. The church is pushed into the forefront of understanding what does it mean then to welcome the stranger? What does it mean to welcome the immigrant, the refugee? And how do we do so in the heart of unity? How do we do so through the lens of how Christ would have done it if he were living in our world today? And so sometimes that means we've got to embrace others, love on others, be able to extend ourselves outside the comfort zones that we may have grown up with, and be willing to take a risk on Jesus, be willing to take a risk on friendship, and ultimately just demonstrate God's love. And so, if we're going to be an intercultural church in these days and in these times, we are called to respect others, share God's love with one another, and really appreciate the mosaic that we are in today, the mosaic of life, to say, God, I thank you for where you have placed me. You have placed me at the crossroads of society so that I can be your ambassador every single day. I'm excited to see how God is going to continue to allow us to be the church for our generation as we begin this process of allowing his light and love to embody the church and be the church in these last days. May God bless you.